Today I'm inviting you to follow along with me as I create a stylized collage animation in After Effects. With this simple practical approach and a low frame rate, it's relatively easy to mimic a stop motion style of animation. I'll be using some public domain illustrations and preparing layers in Photoshop, and then building a rig and animating it in Adobe After Effects. This is an intermediate project that uses the motion plugin from Mount Mograph, but you don't need that plugin to follow along. Alright, I'm starting with Photoshop open and my PNG file open as well. I've got here, this is a public domain image where I've had the background taken out. You can use anything you want, really. This could be a photograph, it could be an old illustration, but for this tutorial, I'm going to be using this scientific, it's like an Audubon type thing. Which is pretty cool. So I'm going to start by selecting the pen tool over here, getting in real close, and I'm going to make a couple copies of this layer. Control J is the hotkey for Photoshop. And keep in mind, what do you want to do? How do you want to animate the character that you're going to be using? If you're only going to be animating the face, you don't need to be making a million layers. But I would like for it to have a decent amount of movement. I'll probably just have a single layer for the legs. This leg in particular I might make 2 layers out of, so it can bend at the joint there, and then just like the head and the neck will have their own thing going on. So we'll start on my second layer, and just with the pen tool selected, again it's P hotkey. I'm going to start by cutting out the torso. When you're closing a loop with the pen tool, if you hold the Alt button on the final connecting point, it will allow you to shape the end point. So that can get kind of frustrating sometimes. But anyway, as you can see here, I've selected basically the torso and the neck, and you don't have to get perfect around edges if this is in fact a transparent PNG. Right click on this vector shape and select Make Selection. And I choose typically 0 pixel for feathering the radius. That makes it a very sharp line. You can smooth that out by feathering the radius if you'd like. And now with that selected, I can create a layer mask. And now, if I go in here and I want to clean anything up, which I may want to do, I'll make my selections again with the pen tool. Right click, make selection. And here I'm going to just go up to Edit, Fill, Content Aware, and that should just smooth out areas because we're going to be overlapping the limbs here. Might not even need pen tool for some of this. I'll try it with the marquee tool and do the same thing. Fill, Content Aware, and get rid of that head. Fill, Content Aware. And this area is not necessarily going to be seen, so it doesn't have to be perfect. That looks good enough, really. One thing I didn't keep in mind, though, is that these areas get filled when I use that tool. So one way to avoid this issue from happening is to actually apply your layer mask before you start doing that, and then you can click your layer, and that will select the outline, create a new layer mask. And now anything you do to it that's outside the boundaries of this layer mask you won't be able to see. It saves a lot of time. In the long run. And when you're converting stuff to use in After Effects, you want to keep this layer mask on it, so that will make the layers selectable, their actual shape, rather than selecting the entire image. When it happens to you once, you'll know what I'm talking about, and it is quite frustrating. So I'm going to speed through this and do the same with all the limbs. For this one, the front leg here, the front behind leg, you can see a lot of this other leg goes in front of it. So what I'm going to do is approximate the shape and do the content aware fill, as I mentioned earlier. So to avoid the issue I had earlier, I can right click and apply layer mask. Now I control click the layer. You can see the marching ants there. It's made the selection. Now I can create a new layer mask with that new alpha applied. That done, I'm just going to go ahead and select the areas I'd like to get rid of. Fill, content aware. And it's not great, but like I said, you're not going to see most of it, so not a huge issue. This, on the other hand, is not quite as good. So what I will do is instead, I'm going to use the stamp tool here. Yeah. Clone stamp. And in order to use that, you have to alt click a layer to clone from, or an area rather, and then you can simply paint in the new pixels. I used to use this all the time for photo work, but now I don't use it as much for video because I don't have as many situations where I need it to look like perfect. So that's a really quick job there, but I'm not gonna need anything more than that. And you can see here when these two legs are behind the deer, most of those areas are not even going to show. Or actually, this is an antelope, not a deer. Got to get the terminology right. And for this one, as I mentioned before, I'm going to go a little different. I think I want it to be lifting its front leg in the animation that I'll be doing. So I'm going to go ahead and make 2 layers from this. Keeping in mind where the underneath layer is, I'm kind of zoom in here for the next one. I want to kind of approximate the joint shape since it will be rotating in kind of a circular motion. I don't want any gaps to show up. You know what? I had to come a little closer to the edges here. And there we go. You can actually test these joints beforehand. Scratch that too. Okay, so that looks like it's going to work out pretty well. And the last thing to do is the head. So, do I want to do an ear? Maybe. Actually, I'll copy the head when I... Okay, now that I've got everything separated, the final step in this particular process, I'm going to go and save it first. Yeah, so the last process is going to be labeling everything. I find that it's a lot easier to do in Photoshop than in After Effects. Alright, that's all set, so let's close this out and open up After Effects. Okay, so I've got a new project open in After Effects. So I'll start by going to File, Import, and I'll select my antelope rig and make sure to go down here, import as composition, retain layer sizes. Just going to ask you again just to make sure, composition, retain layer sizes. We want to have access to all the layers here. And then I can simply double click to open it up. It's pretty low res, so I can keep this file at full resolution. And now for the fun part. So I'm going to select all of these and drop down menu here. I'm just going to lower the opacity to about 50%. This will allow me to see the borders of each layer. And now I can select each layer individually. If you press Y, that's the pan behind tool, you can move the anchor points to where you want the legs to bend, or just your pivot points in general. And for the most part, that's really all you need to start animating. But it is a little tedious to do it by hand. So the next step here will be to parent everything appropriately where it would connect, and we'll make the torso the main parent of everything. So we'll take all the legs to start and parent those to the torso, and then the head to the torso as well. Next, I can parent the ear to the head, and the secondary portion of the leg I will parent to its first portion. And now with that, if I take the rotate tool, you can see everything will pivot really nicely on its pivot point. So like I said, that's really all you need to get started. And you know, many animators do prefer to work rather simply like that. We could take it a step further and add things like puppet pins to further deform the shape and make a little bit more of a realistic movement. Since I'm going for a paper cut look here, I will actually be using it as it is, as you see. But a few adjustments I'm going to make. For starters, I'm going to parent the rotation of the bottom part of this leg to the rotation of the top portion, so they move kind of simultaneously. It's just like limits the amount of keyframes I need, which is nice. So parent to that rotation, and if I multiply that by a negative value, it will move in the opposite direction, so it kind of has an accordion fold effect, which is cool. Yep. This is just like a background animal, so it doesn't need to move a ton. So I really like that. So now I'm going to go ahead and actually just animate a simple action here. So I want to make sure my composition settings are correct. I want this to be in 15 frames per second, and it appears to be, everything looks good there. I have that same frame rate set up in my workspace here. So I think what I'd like to do is actually lower the neck, and I could do that with puppet pins, but I'm actually going to kind of do something similar to what we were doing in Photoshop. I'm going to do that directly in After Effects, just to create a separate layer for the torso. And for that, Control D in After Effects. I'm going to shut that one off, and using the pen tool, I'm going to separate the neck. And if you double click the pan behind tool, it will set your anchor point in the center of your layer, which is a nice little tip. Now I'm going to remove the neck from the torso. Same deal. So torso 2, going to parent to torso 1, and I'm actually going to take that head and parent it now to torso 2 instead. I can actually rename it as well. And one other thing I wanted to add to all of these before I get started animating, I'm going to select everything, right click, and layer styles. I wanted to add a drop shadow just to kind of make it look like it was cut paper. And because everything's selected, it will, editing one layer will affect all the rest. And that alone looks really neat. So I'm going to start by lifting the neck up. Maybe this antelope is drinking. So actually what I'll do, because of that, I'm going to unpair. Sorry for the complication here, but it's a work in progress and I've got an idea. So these two hind legs currently are paired with the torso, and because of that, if I move the torso, the hind legs will move. But if I just want to move the front legs and the torso, I can actually unparent these two and they can be the main parent. I can now parent the torso to that hind leg. So now if this one moves, the torso moves. If I want to, yeah, that's pretty cool. So I'm going to say this will be the default torso position. So I'm just going to go to transform and start my keyframing there. Now if I skip back a little bit and move down, I can have the deer lifting itself up a little bit. And I'm going to follow that movement with the movement of the neck as well. I don't have to get the timing perfect right now. This is, you know, simply getting the bare bones in there. And kind of flattens out there, so. Add some rotation to that. I'm going to overshoot and then bump forward 2 frames and go up. That's pretty cool. I like that. So the movement of the torso is like way too slow. I'm gonna shorten that quite a bit. I love the movement of the head. And I would like this leg to be down a little closer to the ground. So now you can remember, because this one is linked in rotation, I don't need to animate both layers, simply the top one. And we'll start from there to here. I'm gonna overshoot this as well, so it's gonna get really tight and then relax over the course of maybe 4 frames to its final position. This just adds a little bounce. Really important to kind of selling certain movements and making them not look too robotic. That one actually still looks pretty robotic, so. Maybe we'll start this a little sooner. And make the movement faster. I don't know if I like that overshoot too much. No, I do like the overshoot. So indecisive. Now I'm going to go to the back leg, and I'm going to animate its position. So right there is where the torso stops. I'll be setting my keyframe there and going to the beginning of the torso movement and raising it up there. That looks pretty good. What I'll also do is add a rotation to it. So it looks like it's lifting its foot up a little bit and then placing it back down. And once you have one keyframe, you can pretty much just move either in this panel down here or up here with your rotate or your selection tool. And it will automatically place it down here in your timeline. That's not bad. Okay. And now I'm just going to add a little bit of idle movement for the neck and the head. As I said, this is not anything terribly involved. This is a background element for a video. Same for the head. And that looks pretty cool. I'm going to also take the ear and add a little flick of the ear. And I'll do that right after its head comes up, and I might actually do it once again later in the action. What's that? Here we go. Start right there. Start my keyframe. Probably come forward 2 frames. Flick that ear down. And 2 more frames. Actually, I can just copy paste the first frame so it ends up in the same position. Oh, or I'll add another overshoot. That's not a bad idea. Yeah, I like that. I think I'd like a little movement on this leg. Just a little rotation, nothing crazy. Pretty fast as well, just a little bit of a stomp. Again, copy and paste there. That's a little too much. Just want it to be super subtle. And we'll actually get this one bending down again as well. A little bit more of a relaxed stance. Copy paste that ear movement here, so it'll happen again. I like that. It's kind of like the antelope popped its head up, doesn't sense any danger, and so it can kind of relax a little bit. So I don't love the initial movements of these 2 front legs, but that's okay. I just think it's a timing issue. I do like the actual movements there. So I might want to start this one a little bit further forward. Right there. Here, if I press this button here, I'll just add a keyframe, a still keyframe. I'm going to move it up a smidge before I start moving it down. I think that's the move right there. It's the initial tense of the muscle and then the relaxing. And now for this one. That is terribly awkward, isn't it? Yeah, I'm gonna close up this rotation. So that'll happen really quickly. See if that looks a little better. No. I mean, a little, but not. Maybe at the end. There we go. Let's try that. I'm gonna really close that up, just make it a 1 frame bump up. Okay. And that pretty much does it. So the beginning here, I could add a couple rotations real quick just for the sake of it not being so static. I will add them to the head. So keyframe here in its position, and now I can just move it down and up a little bit. And you can see here, definitely getting out of the frame. So go to my composition settings and just increase the width. It's a good 10-second background element pretty quickly. The last order of business, and I do this a very lazy way, but you can take your time and really mess with the easing using the graph editor. What I'm going to do is I use an extension called Motion 3. It is invaluable. I literally use it for every animation. And its easy ease little section over here is great. I highly recommend it. So for most of the movements, what I'm going to do is an ease in. So they'll start sharp, but then they'll end a lot smoother. And this really, I mean, I can't stress enough how important this is to really selling movements. It just looks so much more organic when you add a bit of easing there. And you know, I'm just gonna add the same easing to everything, see how it looks. Let's see how much of a difference that makes. Wonderful. Wonderful. Now I only have about 50 to go. And we'll have a nice little wildlife scene. If you want to export this to layer over, you know, I could take a new composition and do it that way. Let's say 1080, but at 15 frames per second. And I could import some kind of background. So I have just a random sky thing. I actually don't even know where I got this, but oh, it says right there, textures.com. Gotta love textures.com. I'm just using this as an example for you. So say we have these two, and can go up to effects on this one and key out the white background. Then what I can do is go into my project, grab the antelope rig, and just drop it over that scene. And it's, you know, I could render this all out as one composition sequence. I'm not going to do that, but that's an option, and it looks pretty cool. Instead, what I'm going to do is go into the actual rig, and I'm going to export it as a transparent PNG sequence, and that way I can just plop that over whatever background I end up using. It's just a little bit more versatile. I'll be adding a lot of these characters into backgrounds. I want to reuse this asset, potentially flip it, you know, double it, make more antelope that have similar movements. So knowing that, it's best to have it as a transparent PNG sequence. So I would go into here, format, PNG sequence, make sure under video output you select RGB and alpha. If you don't do that, it'll put a background in there. And then whatever your default color is, that will be the background. If you have issues with that, that's why you need to make sure that you are selecting the RGB and alpha information to be exported. And now that I have my custom PNG sequence, I'm just going to go ahead and what this does, it auto saves it in a subfolder, which is great. All right. And now that that's done, you'll be able to see here, I could import it into any scene by going into the folder, selecting the first image in the sequence, and then selecting PNG sequence. That just lets After Effects know to import it as one sequence rather than all its individual files, which if you ever accidentally do that, it is a pain in the butt. Now you want to go up here, right click your sequence, go to Interpret Footage, Main, and select the frame rate of your composition. As I mentioned earlier, I'm doing this 15 frames per second, but After Effects, when it does import any sequence, it automatically assumes the frame rate of 30 frames per second. So you want to change that. Now I can drag it into any other composition, and this is something, you know, you could still double the other one too, but I can reuse this as many times as I want. I can bring it into other projects, and there it is. Hopefully this gave you some good ideas and tricks that you can use in your own projects. If it did, let me know in the comments, and happy animating.